Well, thank you all for coming. I'm Darryl Cherney, your moderator and the organizer of the event. This is the Judi Bari exhibit here at the Mendocino County Museum, which is a big thrill to have. This is our sixth and perhaps our final forum. I mean, I'm talking to Karen, seeing if we can't just stretch this out for the next year or two. I understand attendance is up ever since they put the bomb car in the museum. I mean, who doesn't want to see a bomb car, right? We were originally, when this was supposed to be the 30th anniversary, on 2020, on May 24th, we were actually scheduled to be literally opposite the car show, which was going to be right across the street in the park. And so, great, it's a car show, just, you know, it's a natural. That said, I want to apologize. We had 2 car breakdowns because we brought 2 vehicles with me because we got some stuff to bring back, and so I busted a nasty flat and couldn't get the tire off. It was bound onto the studs, but we got it off eventually. And then my Volvo 1989, old school Humboldt, you know, dirt road vehicle, just stopped running in the middle of the road, and the CHP had to push Trinity off to the side, and she's there now with the vehicle. So if for any reason this AAA wants me to be there, she's about 3 miles away, I might just take off and leave it up to you guys. And Alicia, you might want to substitute moderate if I have to book out of here.
You got it.
Thank you very much. Okay. So let me introduce the panelists first, and then I'll say a few words. To my left, Art Harwood of Harwood Lumber. Ernie Pardini from Pardini Logging. Naomi Wagner from Earth First and other places as well. And at the very end, Walter Smith, behind that masked man. Independent contractor, worked a lot for LP back in the day. I don't know what you're doing these days. I know you work with the Institute for Sustainable Forestry.
Yeah.
You're on the board, are you not? You work there. So, each of us will take about 10 minutes or so. Could be 12 or 15, it's okay. Just whatever you got to say, just let it out.
Well, Darryl, can I just ask, we didn't have a chance to really discuss.
We did not.
I could take the whole time talking, so is there something specific that we want to really focus on here?
We really want to focus on Judi and her work reaching out to people in the timber industry. And if it happened to be that night, 2 nights before the bombing at, I think it was John's Bar here in Commercial, or it was other times that she reached out to you on the phone, or just what you felt about her personally, you know, in your relationship with her, and how she affected you, or how the bombing even affected the relationship, anything along those lines. And knowing the characters up here, I think we all could take the 90 minutes. So, but does that help?
That's good. Perfect.
All right. So I'll start by saying that I grew up in New York City. I grew up in Manhattan, and despite the fact that Manhattan might seem like, oh, it's New York, it's actually a very working class town. And in fact, you got to work in Manhattan, you got to work in New York to pay the damn rent. And so I grew up. I remember high school going to hang out with the waitresses at the local cafes where you'd go for your lunch break, because we did get out to have lunch where I went to high school. And then I worked at various corporations where I hung out with either the people in the mailroom or the secretarial pool. My father was a union teacher. He's the American Federation of Teachers. And you could just see the hustle and bustle of everybody working their butts off in New York. And so what I'm trying to get at is that I grew up with a really great respect for working people, for people who work hard. And I don't know if anybody in New York worked as hard as people in the timber industry, but I do know that people in New York work real hard. So when I came out here and found myself, you know, trying to save redwoods, and all of a sudden at odds with people in the timber industry, and in particular loggers, feeling we were trying to take their jobs, or timber fallers, or mill workers, you know, the whole array of different jobs that they have in the industry. Part of me was kind of a little shocked, because it was like, no, I'm not against working people. I've been for working people my whole life, but I can certainly understand where they were coming from. But I felt we needed to do something to fix that. So about a year and a half before I met Judi, I created a little newsletter called Save the Loggers League. And I'm sorry I didn't bring one with me. And it had these different articles about reaching out to the fallers, and I went and mailed it to all the P.O. boxes in Scotia and Rio Dale. You could do that back then. You just send a bulk mailing out to every P.O. box, and they would just drop one in each one. Later on, when I wrote Where Are We Gonna Work When the Trees Are Gone, I actually sent out the lyrics and offered to send out cassette copies of it to anybody also in Rio Dale and Scotia, over the Pacific Lumber Company towns up in Humboldt. And then later, I hooked up with the Industrial Workers of the World, sort of the radical labor union. And right around that same time, I was meeting Judi Bari. But before Judi and I got into trying to reach out to the timber workers, the Industrial Worker had an issue that said Wobblies meet Earth First meet the Wobblies. Wobblies being the nickname for the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW or the Wobblies. And what it was a two articles, one written by Roger Featherstone and one written by somebody in the IWW, showing the similarities between the labor movement and the environmental movement. And right around the same time, I met Judi Bari, and one of the first things that she did when I got to her house was she showed me her wall of labor books. And I talked about this in an earlier forum, but just a wall. And Judi, I was actually running for Congress at the time, and Judi said to me, she saw my brochure, she helped me lay out my brochure, and she said, "So what's your position on economics?" And I went, "I don't have a position on economics." And she just did something between bursting out laughing and ready to like read me a new one. It's like, "You don't have a position on economics? Are you out of your mind? And how can you run for Congress and not have a position on economics? And what are you doing running for Congress anyway? You should be up in a tree. You can't change anything in Washington, D.C." Which of course I fell in love with her immediately, but completely berated and have my grave dug for me. And that's when I invited myself to her house, and that's when I saw the wall of labor books. And I said, okay, if you read just one, which one would it be? It would be Labor's Untold Story, is what she recommended to me. And when I read it, I immediately realized that the environmental movement had its roots in the labor movement. And, we can talk about Earth First's relationship to sabotage, and I know that's always a sensitive subject when it comes to the people in the timber industry, but the fact is that it was the workers in the timber industry who were sabotaging equipment long before, and not just in the industry, but in the auto industry, in the textile business. Sabotage is not the purview of Earth First. It was actually something that workers did when they were fighting for their rights. And although Judi Bari did call for an end to tree spiking in 1990, reaching out to the timber industry, it's a fact that the first tree spiking law on the books in California was from 1875. And that was to stop the unions from spiking the timber industry trees. So I'm just making the point that all of a sudden I saw the relationship. Plus the IWW was a singing movement. The labor movement had a lot of songs, and Earth First had a lot of songs. And there was a spirit, especially from the IWW, that Earth First also had. So that was when I started to draw the line between the two. And the thing about Judi is that she was an actual labor organizer. She wasn't just, like the IWW was busted by the FBI. Oh, that's something else that Earth First and the IWW have in common. The FBI was actually created right around 1917 to destroy the industrial workers of the world specifically and the labor movement in general. Excuse me. The FBI was set up as a political police force to destroy the labor movement. So that was something, as I said, that's something else we had in common. So moving ahead to Judi Bari, by the time I met her in 1988, she had already led a wildcat strike of the United States postal workers in 1974, I believe, in Washington, D.C. She also led a strike of cashiers of Retail Clerks Union, and that people worked, I believe, at the Safeway in Baltimore or Washington, D.C., I forget, also in the early 70s. So she, and she was a carpenter, and she was not just a carpenter, she was a foreman, and she called herself a foreman. She said, "Yes, I'm a feminist, but I call myself a foreman. I'm going to own that title." And she was in charge of a 6-man construction crew. So whenever she did a blockade of a logging operation, they'd say, "Well, get a job." She said, "I have a job. I'm a carpenter. I work with wood just as you do." And somebody else that Judy said, she said, the loggers may make the first cut, and the mill workers may make the second cut. But it's the Earth First Journal that publishes on its newspaper that makes the third cut, drawing the lines straight from the tree to the newspaper. And recycling all aside, it's still made out of wood. Okay. So Judy really had she could speak really in very basic terms, really that everybody could understand, except that people weren't really saying these kind of things. And Judy made us understand, very vehement about it, that the people who worked in the industry were not the enemy. Charles Hurwitz and his Wall Street crew, who did the hostile takeover of Pacific Lumber using junk bonds and the help of criminal Michael Milken, who was sentenced to 5 years for insider trading, and Ivan Boesky, who profited from insider trading, all on Pacific Lumber takeover, by the way, as well as other companies. They were the problem. So that was kind of where it started, with Judy. And one of the things she also said is, in order to work with people in the timber industry, in order to reach out to them, to organize with them, the first thing you have to do is like them. And for me, if I may say, that was easy, because I've always liked pretty much everybody. And I've always liked hardworking people. Even though I'm Darryl Cherney and the radical, crazy-haired Earth Firster, I am still that working-class kid from New York who grew up. I was a moving man. I worked hard myself, and then I came out here, and of course, fell into the full-time activism circuit. But I appreciated the fact that the people in the industry worked hard and didn't want it to be a polar opposite problem. So that said, we started. One of the things that Judy would do is, if we were blockading a logging operation, she'd start talking to the people we were blockading, and start getting some phone numbers, asking people out for coffee. And for example, she found a lot of people didn't want to go out for coffee because they were scared they would lose their jobs. But the ones who did go out for coffee with us, and it wasn't just her and myself, there was others as well, we started having real good conversations. In fact, one of the people who really helped facilitate those conversations up in Humboldt was Roger Radoni, who became supervisor. He was a rancher and had family in the business, and he brought people together at his place. There was the Logger Earth First Christmas party over at
Irene Heskett.
Thank you, Irene's house. Those were great parties. I think there's 2 of them that I was at. I got really drunk. It's a whole different story. So all that really came, and there was real meaningful stuff happening. She was representing she was representing mill workers who got poisoned at the Georgia Pacific Mill. She represented the family of Ferdinando Reis, a Portuguese man who got killed at an LP mill because he didn't read or speak English, and LP didn't want to give his wife death benefits, and Judi Bari fought to give him death benefits. And the other thing Judi Bari said about that, just anybody in any circumstances, if you want people to work on your issue, the first thing you got to do is work on theirs. So there she was, getting Ferdinando Reis' widow for death benefits and fighting for the people at Georgia Pacific Mill to get them, benefits for I got cancer. At least one of them got cancer for sure, and he got it quickly because they were poisoned by PCB. One of them took it right in the mouth. So that said, Judy was the real deal. She wasn't just talking the talk; she was doing the thing. And I could go on and on, as Art said. We can all go on and on, but the bombing is what really stopped that thing in its tracks, at least for a while. And a lot of us, including myself, feel that the reason Judy was targeted was not just because she was saving trees, and not just because Forest Forever was on the ballot, which would have slowed down pure cutting and widened stream protection zones, but because she presented the double threat of also reaching out to the timber industry. And something I say in the movie, but I'm going to say it here again. The most dangerous thing you can do is not be enemies with people in the timber industry. The most dangerous thing you can do is be friends with people in the timber industry. And that's why we see today, in this crazy world, our whole country is divided and conquered. And despite what we think about whatever the issues are, I'm not even going to name them because they're all little, buzzwords that get everybody going. The fact is, we have 99% in common with each other. We want our children to go to school and have a good health. We want to have a roof over our heads. We want to have medical care. We want to have, food at the table. We, basically 99% of who we are is exactly the same. We breathe air, we drink water. But what I also say is that 1% is like a spice. You can have the exact same ingredients in a big pot of food, and the spice you put in it is what makes it taste completely different. Whether it's curry or red pepper or cardamom or basil, whatever you put in that pot, it's going to make that same ingredients taste different. And I kind of see that's the way humanity is. We're all the same except for that little tiny bit of spice. And if we could just see the part that's the same instead of the part that's different, we might, and we will, do a lot better moving on into the future. So I'm going to turn it over to Art Harwood. And I want to just thank all the people who are here for the timber industry today, for their graciousness to come here and talk about, to first of all, answer my phone calls, and then be gracious enough to come here to the museum today. So Art Harwood from Branscombe, I believe.
From Branscombe, yes. Okay. Well, thanks, sir. Well, actually, it's good. It is good to be here, and I kind of wish that I maybe had the opportunity to see some of the other sessions, but I didn't, and that's on me. Whatever. Because one of the things that I thought about, well, what is it that we're supposed to talk about here? And I thought, well, I'm not going to sit here and say that Judy and I agreed on much.
That's all right.
But that's all right. That is all right.
Yes, it is.
And that's it. But what we did do is that we communicated, and that was a big thing. And so before I get into maybe stuff we didn't agree on, which I may or may not, what I want to say is that we developed a trust between us, and where she could call me on the phone. We talked a lot. We attended lots of group meetings, and it was just pure cut the bullshit. This is honest. Okay, Judy, I don't agree with what you're doing, but whatever, you're going to do it. So here's what I'll do to, not, I don't want to say be of help because I wasn't, but do whatever I was going to do. So anyways, so I just want to start off by just making that point, that there was a total trust and respect between myself and Judy. And I knew that when she told me something, I could count on that. And she knew when I told her something, she could count on that. And so that was really important. And that's probably where most of the agreements ended. Okay? Well, no. We both, and I think this is important, we all knew that the big timber companies were exploiting the resource. Everybody knew that. And so it wasn't hard to, when you're talking to timber workers, it wasn't hard to convince them what was going on, but then that was their livelihood. And so one of the problems, as I think back and reflect on it, is that timber workers, and myself included, there was this bigger thing going on between, you had Judy and Darryl and the rest of the movement, and they were doing their thing, and they were trying to stop the big timber companies. But there was a group of people caught in the middle, and that was the timber workers. And so, when you talk about reaching out to timber workers, and I know that there's a few cases where timber workers maybe came over to whatever, full-fledged to whatever you were doing, but by and large they didn't. And they didn't because what we all figured out is that in this war, Judy could look me in the face and say, Art, I like you, and I wish you the best and whatever, but at the same time, she'd look me in the face. What I knew, because she did it, is that when there was something going on, and Judy and Darryl and everybody, Naomi, you're over there. Soccer mom. I'm going to come back to that story. But what I knew is that when there was some way that Judi could make a big splash, and she was a master tactician. I mean, that was extremely impressive, master tactician. And when there was a way she could make a big splash, she went for it. And it didn't matter who was in the way. It's true. And so basically, we were collateral damage. Those two words, collateral damage. And so we always knew, it's like, fine, Judi, I'm going to work with you as best I can, but I also know that if you're doing whatever you're doing and I become collateral damage, that's just the way it was going to be. And so that was part of our relationship, is that I understood that, so that was fine. It didn't bother me. I just understood because part of understanding and working with Judi was understanding the rules of the game. Because they first played by different rules than anybody that I ever dealt with played by. So I mean, basically the first time or two that we, had, I don't know, we'll call it confrontations, maybe counter demonstrations, whatever. We got our ass handed to us, but then we learned the rules. And it was like, okay, we can play by these rules. So I think we did pretty good after that, holding our own, we felt like we did. So that was good.
What do you mean by that? Could you explain?
But it was different, and it was interesting times. What I always say was after Redwood Summer, and my relationship with Judi was before Redwood Summer, but maybe not much before a year or two. But boy, after that, it consumes you. When you're, I know we were all consumed for different reasons, and when it was over, I was like, man, I don't regret anything I did here, but I don't want to do that again. I mean, that was kind of how I saw it. But anyways, I want to go back. I'm going to back up, and I was watching your film in there, and there was the Elkhorn Ridge stuff you were talking about. That's the first time I became aware of the Earth First presence in our community, and that timber sale belonged to our local, my family sawmill, and we were like, well, I mean, if that timber sale means that much to those people, fine, we'll let BLM, we don't have to cut those trees, we'll get a timber sale somewhere else. So that was kind of my first exposure.
That's Bureau of Land Management.
Oh yeah, Bureau of Land Management. But anyways, what I noticed, and I kind of forget if I even went out there, I must have, but what I noticed is that with the Earth First protesters, there were a lot of familiar faces. And, it kind of, so then the protests, it kind of spilled over into our schools. That's another story. First time I ever met Darryl at a school board meeting with his guitar. Hey, how you doing? I'm like, I'm here for the circus.
Was that the Lorax?
That was the Lorax.
The Lorax book man.
That's another book. Book.
Part of the song.
No, that's all right.
What I and others learned in looking at the people that were protesting our particular timber sale, and is that we knew these people. They were members of our community. They had kids on our kids' soccer teams. They had kids on our kids' Little League team. Their kids were in our classroom. My son, who was in 5th grade at the time, his girlfriend was the Earth First leader's daughter. That was Rick Conger. He was in the film. And so we looked and we thought, well, we know these people. We don't know them well, but I mean, we see them at school and at soccer and Little League games and around town. And man, we need to have a conversation here before this gets out of hand. And so we did. We started talking. We had meetings. And I got to throw in something. There's a person that was very important to all of us that many of you here know. A very dear friend of mine, Steve Zweibach. Steve passed away last summer. It was an incredible personal loss to me and really a loss for our community. But Steve was a master.
Is alive.
Steve is dead.
Yes, Darryl, he passed away. Just
Okay.
very, very short ago. It was just a
Yeah,
couple
last
months.
summer.
Okay.
Oh, I gave you his phone number.
Yeah, we did.
I did, yes.
I spoke to him.
Good. I'm glad you did. Good. But anyways, what I want to say about Steve is that, okay, so Steve was a master facilitator, and I should even back up beyond that, is that Steve had the best intentions of everybody and everything, and there's nobody like Steve, and he was just the best. And we could not have had the conversations we had with Earth First and whoever else without Steve. And so we started having these meetings, and of course the first agreement, we found out we could communicate. You know, the first agreement we had was that, okay, we agree that we're not going to bring guns to the meetings. Well, that was good, you know, just a start. And then we started figuring out that, you know, we started talking about things, and then we started figuring out, well, maybe we have more in common than we thought, and then we talked more and more, and then we figured out that maybe we have way more in common than we thought, but there are these things that divide us, and we need to work on it. And so what happened, we were having these meetings with the local Earth Firsters, and then they said, well, you know, we got this person, Judi Bari, and we would like to invite her to the meetings. We're like, we don't care who you invite to the meeting. I mean, ask her to come. You know, I had no idea who Judi was. Apparently, you guys were raised in hell in Humboldt County at the time. So, but anyway, so Judi started coming to the meetings, and that's where, you know, I started developing a relationship with Judi, and that was going along just fine. And then Lorax came along, and it was like, okay, Judi, you will cut my throat. I'm serious.
Over Dr. Zeus book.
Over a Dr. Seuss book. But I understand. I never held that. You know, that's fine. We discussed it. It was like, I understood where I stood. You know, back to the, that's just tough. You know, you were collateral damage, whatever.
What was the controversy?
The controversy was over a Dr. Seuss book called The Lorax and perceived book banning in our local schools. And so, and I will say, to Judi's credit, and I'm sure with a lot of help from her friends, the international attention that she revved up for that was unbelievable. I mean, unbelievable. It might have been more than Redwood Summer, I'm not sure. It was.
The Laytonville School Board meeting had a phalanx of cameras and newspaper reporters from all over the United States.
The world.
The world.
Yeah. So anyways, so I was impressed. You know, I understood. I know where I stood, and I understood what I understood, and so that was good. That was fine. And so anyways, that came and went. We were having these meetings, and I don't know. I don't know how long Redwood Summer was after that. I think
About a year.
about a year. So then, you know, we were all kind of going our separate ways, and I get a call from Judy leading up to Redwood Summer. It's probably in the fall or the spring. And she goes, Judy goes, Art, and she says, we're planning this Mississippi summer in the Redwoods, and you know, we're getting a little concerned that there could be some violence, and we want to see if maybe you can help to quell that. I'm like, what? He said, well, there's a simple way to not have the violence. Don't do it. And she said, well, you know, that's not going to be how this is going to work. We're going to do it. Whether you agree to, you know, participate some way or not. And I'm like, okay, well, I get it. you're gonna do it, so okay, what do you want? Oh, we wanna get together with timber workers, and, we wanna talk, so we can see if we can reduce the violence. And so I said, okay, I will agree to, help facilitate that process. And so what I did is I got, of course, my good friend Steve Zweibach. Never could have that. And instead of just our local Laytonville, Branscombe community, we kind of got the whole county involved. And we started having meetings. I saw Jerry Philbrook in there. So Jerry, Jerry's a logger, was a logger, and pretty hot-headed one at that. So we had to go back to our agreements. Okay, we won't carry weapons to the meetings, you know. And, but pretty soon we got to talking, and okay, well, this is going to happen. Oh, I do recall that we said in these early meetings, it's just going to be us loggers and earthers, and should we invite the sheriff's department later? Later. And there might have been somebody else that was later on that also. But it was like, we don't need them right now. We got things to talk about. And so what we talked about is really rules of engagement. We just agreed that we're not going to agree on what's going on here. But that's not why we're here. Why we're here is to see if we can avoid violence in Redwood Summer. And so we had several meetings. And we came up with these rules of engagement, but what I want to say is that during these meetings, and this goes back to the first meetings we ever had, what was really important is that we had these conversations. We didn't agree with each other, but we found out that there were a lot of things that we could agree on, that we could communicate, that we could come to agreements, that we were all people, you know, as I already said, nobody thought what LP and GP or Max Hammer was doing was any good, so we could all agree on that. And so that was the real huge benefit. I mean, to me, going, as I sit here today, that is what really came out of that, is that we could communicate, and we did have things in common, and we found out that we could, if we communicated enough, we could really do some things. And so anyways, so we, back to Redwood Summer, we laid out these rules of engagement. Okay, well, you know, when the protesters come to the logging show's gate and chain themselves to the gate, then the loggers are gonna, they're just gonna stand aside and let the protesters do what they're gonna do. And then we got hold of the sheriff's department and we said, and by the way, we finally brought them into the discussions, and it's like, okay, protesters are gonna do their protests, they're gonna lock themselves to the gate, the loggers are gonna stand aside, and the sheriff's department's gonna wait 15 minutes, they're gonna come in, they're gonna arrest the protesters, they're gonna haul them down the road a mile, and they're gonna turn them loose. And then we're all gonna go on with our lives, and that's how it worked. It did. It really did. And it was like the loggers, you know, they knew, nobody was surprised. So it was like, it all worked. And I gotta say that I was pretty proud of what we accomplished until that bomb went off. And then I was like, what the fuck? This is not, you know, how could this be? And I guess I'd also say that I never got in my car for I don't know how long without looking underneath it for a bomb. I mean, you might call it an abundance of caution, but I didn't, because I didn't have a clue what happened. And, you know, back to, I'm sure there were some people that were really concerned about Judi making inroads with timber workers, and, although she wasn't really much, a little bit. But I was not naive enough to think I couldn't have been a target too. So, anyways,
Did you
I would like to just quickly just say that one of the things that came after Redwood Summer, and because of our collaboration, is that when LP exited the scene and sold their timberland, a group of us former adversaries got together and basically asked each other, gee, what if we could buy this timberland and own it, manage it for the benefit of the community? And that was where the Redwood Forest Foundation started. And Redwood Forest Foundation now owns 50,000 acres of redwood forest in the Usal area, and is logging and restoring, and it's a wonderful success story. And it would never have happened without the initial discussions we had with Earth First, the local Earth First, with Judi, on with Naomi, and I mean, we learned to communicate, and it's a tremendous success story. It really is. So, and the only other thing I'd say is that I think it's pretty cool, these discussions, because we still don't have to agree on things. We all have our own, see things through our own eyes and have our own perspective, but when we have these discussions, we learn to more and more, that more and more we think alike, and we can do great things if we're working together. There you go.
That's awesome. Ernie Pardini, who I consider a friend and who was just wonderful to hang out with back in the day, actually traveled with Judi and I to, I believe it was Michigan. As a matter of fact, to an IWW conference, and Ernie and Judi were very close. And I could say lots more about Ernie, but I'll let him say it about himself. And anything else you want to say about you and Judi and working to build those bridges? You're in that movie on the radio. You are, that's right.
You're younger.
A little bit.
I'm like you said, I'm a Pardini from a four-generation logging family over in Anderson Valley. And I'd like to start by saying that Judi spoke very highly of Art and considered him the one reasonable arm of the timber industry that would sit and listen and be reasonable and at least hear what you had to say and then make his judgments and decisions based on that. But would at least listen, and that's something we didn't have with the rest of the timber industry. To start this story, in 1984 I moved to New York for 4.5 years. I've been working since high school in the logging industry. But I decided to try a change, and I moved to New York, and I was there for till late 1989. And I came back to Anderson Valley, went back to work for my uncle in the logging woods, and we were on a little job down on the Navarro River, above the Navarro River. It was a very conscientious type logging job, which I was used to, where timber was being select cut and a sizable volume of the timber was being left. And then during that time I was hearing all these stories about Earth First and Judi Bari, but my view was somewhat sullied by all the information coming from the logging industry. I wasn't hearing anything from anybody on the other side. But anyway, I was open-minded enough to at least listen to everything and make my own conclusions. We moved from that job to a job out on the Albion River. And on the way to work the first morning, we drove through miles of just bare hillsides, clear cut. And I looked at that and I said, what in the fuck is that going on? What are we doing? And I got to the job that we were doing and realized that it was also a clear cut. And I went to my uncle and I said, well, why are we doing this? This is crazy. You know better than this. This is not the way to log. And he said, well, I've got payments to make. What can I do? So anyway, I worked there for a few days and I couldn't take it. I quit. And I wrote a letter to the Anderson Valley Advertiser. First of all, after I quit, it was sometime around when the bombing occurred. And that whole story about Judi carrying the bomb and all of that didn't fly with me. It just was too fishy, didn't sound right. So I started just listening more closely to everything I was hearing from the press and all of that, and realized that much of what I've been hearing about Judi was, and about her first, was not true. It was all bullshit. So I wrote a letter to the Anderson Valley Advertiser expressing my views on clear cutting and the practices of LP. Because I had left right when LP had taken over from Masonite Corporation when they had bought them out. And this was the first that I'd really seen of what they were doing. And when that letter came out, I remember going to my dad's house and my dad telling me, you know, you're right, everything you say in there is right. But why do you have to be the one to say it? Why do you have to say it? Why can't somebody else say it? I said, you know, are you really my dad? You taught me all the time I was growing up to stand up for what I believed in and for what I felt was right. That's what I'm doing. And if you don't like it, then I guess everything you told me my whole life was bullshit. Well, that's I just don't think you need to be the one. Now I'm going to hear all this from you. Anyway. So I became the black sheep of the Pardini Logging family. I continued to investigate and at some point, Judi read my letter in the Anderson Valley Advertiser, and she made contact with me through my landlady, who was Diane Pageant Seekins, who was involved in the movement, and set up a meet. So I was to meet Judi out on Navarro Ridge at Daphne's place, right? They have a barbecue. So I show up out there and I see everybody over there around this picnic area, and I'm walking across this field to get there. And I get about from here to that tree, and they burst into song, and the song they're singing is, I used to log for Pardini, I used to cut down, and when they were through, I looked at Judi and I said, don't laugh, I really did work for that song. Anyway, I was blackballed. I had it was a really hard time for me because I would walk into a restaurant full of loggers and who I always had great rapport with and who were friends and relatives, and they would get up and walk out. And it was hard. It was really, really hard. But I stuck to my guns. And after Judi and I met, she asked me if I would do a radio interview, and which I did. And I remember one of the things in that interview, I had come to realize that LP and Maxim Corporation were not logging companies. They were Wall Street investment corporations that were doing what those kind of corporations do. They buy out companies, liquidate their assets, and bail. And I said in that first interview that I would bet my life that in 5 years there was no more LP in Northern California, in Mendocino County. Well, a week and a half short of 5 years from that statement, LP sold the last parcel of land in Mendocino County. And they had a Judi's real passion was to develop a coalition between the environmentalists and the workers, the timber workers, because LP and Maxim hired a well-known public relations firm to spread disinformation about what their intentions were, what about Earth First intentions were, and they portrayed Judi as a real devil and them as saviors, and they had the logging community so buffeted with all this disinformation. When Judi her real purpose was to unite the two to have a strong front against the corporate timber interest, and that was in all of our best interests. When LP took over from Masonite, they cut logging prices, but they made it fly with the loggers by letting them expand and giving them larger volumes of timber to log, because let's face it, they were in a hurry to get it all out. Mm-hmm. So they were letting these people expand their businesses and making less of a profit margin. They cut off all overtime, which is where loggers make their money. Not, they don't get paid that high a wage, but they make it in overtime. So we got rid of all of that. So they were making up a job in the logging industry, unless you own a business or some other capacity. But as far as the workers were concerned, it made it a real second-class job. And it was the most dangerous. There were more deaths per 1,000 workers in the timber industry than any other occupation in the United States, yet it was one of the lowest paid. And realizing that, I met with Judy, we did our interviews, we ended up becoming really close friends. She saved me when I couldn't find a job anywhere. I got turned down for a job as a deli counter person because of my political beliefs. And she hired me as her bodyguard. I guess she heard about some of my brawls in the Boonville Lodge, man. So she really saved me in that respect, and I admire her. She was then, she is now, and she will always be my hero. That woman had more courage in her little finger than the rest of this county, I think, and everybody else that I've ever met. She just, to undergo the kind of pain and humiliation and shame that she went through with that bombing, and to come back as strong as ever and get right back in their face, it just blew me away. It scared me. I was scared to death. I was working as her bodyguard. I drove her everywhere. I had to learn how to sweep her car for bombs before we went anywhere. We would be in a group outing somewhere, and it would be over, and everybody would be filtering out of whatever the venue was. And she would say, "Logger slave, start the car." Judy was a far different person than what the timber industry tried to portray her as. She was loving and compassionate. She was brave. Oh my God, that woman's bravery just blows me away. The bravery of all the earth firsters, for that matter, and the tree sits. She had a way of strong-arming me into things that I didn't really want to do, but she talked me into a tree sit up in Humboldt County. I'm going to get Walker up a tree. That's going to be. So we go out. They get me up this tree in the middle of the night on a little 18-inch wide by 6-foot long platform. And I don't know, 100 some feet up. It's got this 50-foot paper, construction paper banner hanging from the platform. And when I went up the tree, I had to make sure I had a bag of pop with me. Calm my nerves. Anyway, I did okay as long as it lasted, but as soon as I ran out, the wind started blowing, and that paper was acting like a sail. It was blowing that platform out away from the tree and banging it back. And I got on my little radio. I said, "Judy, I need to come down." No, not yet. We've got more press coming. I said, "No, Judy, I need to come down. I'll come down now. You're going to have to come get me." Just, "All right, come down." But, it was a really interesting time, and I'd like to think I have just half the courage that Judy displayed in her endeavors. And whether or not you agreed with what she did, what she believed, you had to admire her courage and her ability to unite people and to bring people together was just incredible. And her work, her dedication, she spent her whole life, she dedicated herself to this cause and ultimately died for it. And I just would like to take my hats off to Judy. Thank you very much.
So we're going to move on to Walter Smith. Walter's an independent contractor, spoke in Board of Supervisors meetings. In fact, you're in the movie too, as a matter of fact.
Indeed.
Walter, why don't you talk a little bit about your career, just a little synopsis of who you are and what you've done, and then your experiences with Judy, if you please.
Okay. Well, a little bit of my background. I too am a logger. My parents, my family's been in the logging business. As a matter of fact, we worked for Willits Redwood Products, and that Harwood bought. So actually, we worked for Harwood Products for a number of years before they actually gave up the logging company. I worked in the mill a little bit, but mostly I worked as a timber faller for the Harwood logging crew. Somewhere along the way in after the logging, or after Harwood sold the logging company, I think it sold to Schuster's. I went and just became an independent contractor. I worked for any logging company that had a job that I liked working for. And then in the mid-'80s, 1984, 85, a couple other fellows and myself, we formed a contract logging company, and we worked for Louisiana Pacific. So that's where I've got a lot of experience about what was going on in terms of what was going on in the forest, and how Louisiana Pacific particularly was mining the forest. They weren't actually doing forest management, and of course we were participating in that. So a lot of what Ernie was saying is true, is that as time went on, if you all remember the whole issue around taking everything off the forest floor in the late 80s, and they were starting to send it to the pulp mill or chipping it in the mill, and anything we could actually get onto a logging truck was taken from the forest. So at that point, that's when I became an activist in my own way. Never was a tree sitter or chained myself to a logging truck or anything, but in my own way became active in trying to change the way the timber industry works. That led me, and I'll make this quick, to Jan Iris, who started the Institute for Sustainable Forestry, and I became involved in that with Tracy, another Earth Firster, and we actually, I should admit this now, that we used Earth First to get money to start the Institute for Sustainable Forestry. And that happens that you had Logger and you had Earth Firster would go to the foundations and say how we got along so well together, we understood what was going on in the forest, blah, 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 and they loved both of us and they sent us money. So anyway, then I got involved in that, and then from that I got involved in this international organization called the Rainforest Alliance, and became sort of a world traveler working on sustainable forestry issues. So that's kind of the short story of my life. But where I met Judi, and maybe a little like Ernie, I wasn't, it was easy for me to make friends and to become part of Judi's circle, because in 1989 I did the same, made a big statement in the newspaper, went to a board of supervisors meeting and said, they're ruining our forest. I belong to the Forest Advisory Committee, which was the first committee that was created, and in that committee I tended to side with the environmental people that were involved in it. But it wasn't just me, there was foresters who also understood that we weren't doing forest management anymore, we were doing forest mining, and we were getting rid of any I used to say that they would tell us to cut down any tree that would cast a shadow, and that's kind of the way it was. Even when they were doing just quote overstory removal, if the tree would make a log, it didn't mean that the overstory that had created regeneration, anything that was big enough to take, we would take it. So anyway, there was, and one of the, sort of the last, how can I put it, the final straw for me was they were closing down the sawmills and opening up a remanufacturing plant in Mexico. I don't know if you remember that. So Potter Valley, and the mills were going down as we knew they would. When they came to the end of the forest, they didn't have enough logs, mills were going to close. So it started in Covelo, and Covelo is interesting. I lived in Covelo for a while. They built a brand new sawmill in Covelo. They fought the board of supervisors to keeping, to not put in a sprinkler system. And lo and behold, 2 years later, the mill burned down. And it happened to burn down when there wasn't any more logs, where the Forest Service was closing down at the same time. And then they shut the Willits mill down, they shut the Potter Valley mill down, blah, blah, blah. This was all going in. And eventually, of course, Cloverdale mill, even after they put a lot of energy into it. So they shut down the Potter Valley mill. They opened up the remanufacturing plant in Mexico, and that was sort of the last straw for me. So I went to a meeting in at the Board of Supervisors, Norman Duvall, even Don Nelson from the union in Georgia Pacific came. I don't know if Betty was there. There were some other enviros, and through the door after we were all there came this enormous light called Judi Bari, and that was the first time that I had met her. And as you all know, she was brilliant. She's somebody who could just riff off all the things that we needed to hear. No ums, ands, or buts. No stall in her language. Just be able to just brilliantly put it all in perspective in one paragraph. And so I went home to my wife and told my wife I just met the most brilliant person that I'd ever met. And then from there, of course, I had to quit the logging business because Louisiana Pacific was going to kick out my whole crew. I couldn't jeopardize the whole crew for my own personal and political reasons and environmental reasons. So I quit, and same as Ernie, I had a hard time finding a job after that, although I was hired by a small contractor to do timber falling, which was great. And he's kind of a tragic story in himself. But anyway, so I met Judi, and then she tried to recruit me into the IWW, and we went to different meetings, and she was trying to strong arm me into it. I'm not a union guy. I'm not a protester. And as a matter of fact, if you see me around here, I'm kind of an introvert for the most part. I want to just stay out of the way, help things out, but not necessarily be the spotlight. I am when I have to be. But so anyway, Judi and I had a great relationship. Went to these meetings, and then so that was in '89, of course. And I met her. I think it was more like I'm going to guess August or September of '89, and we had these meetings, and then there was the planning for Redwood Summer, which I actually spoke at the rally that was held in Fort Bragg. And I don't know if nobody's mentioned that. We were at the rally in Fort Bragg, and and there was another rally going on with the timber industry over in another part of town in Fort Bragg. And on the roof of these warehouses was police with automatic weapons. I mean, I was just wondering maybe if you were at the other one, or whether there was police with automatic weapons there as well. I thought it was a little overkill in terms of their interest in us. Anyway, so then a lot of my relationship with Judi was a little bit short-lived. And I'll tell you why, and it revolved around the bombing. Anyway, the day of the bombing, I was actually cutting timber out somewhere outside of Anderson Valley, and I'd gotten into my truck, and I had heard it on the radio on the way in, and so I went to the environmental center, and I think a few days later we had a rally at the courthouse and stuff, and it was just so shocking. I was saying, anybody that would believe that she was the terrorist. It was just unbelievable. I mean, it was right off the bat. It was like somebody bombed Judi Bari. It wasn't like Judi Bari was carrying a bomb. That wouldn't have entered into anybody who knew her would enter into their minds. Anyway, so a funny aside from that is I came back from the from my job, and as it turns out, I had fell a tree across the power lines just before leaving and finding out that Judi Bari was bombed. So in retrospect, coming back, you know, it's sort of like, take that, Dave Foreman. I can knock down some power lines. You need power lines down, ask a lawyer. So anyway, I was lucky because I think I only cut off, you know, the electricity to a couple of houses, so Judy would have named me Walter Little Pole. Anyway, it was kind of ironic. And so, at some point, I don't know, in the weeks after the bombing, when she was still in the hospital, I did go down to visit her at the hospital. And at that point, she wasn't under arrest anymore. I think there was an officer at the door of her room, sort of guarding against nefarious people who might come in and try to do her harm. So when I got there, you know, we were talking, and pretty soon the doctor comes in, the doctor and nurses, and they said, "We're going to take some screws out of your leg." And I don't know if it was her leg or whether it was hip or whatever. And both of us kind of went, "What?" and then he like reached into his bag and he pulled out this, what he was going to use, and it's a brace and bit. Do you know what that is? Mm-hmm. I'm going to show you. I brought a little visual aid. This is a brace and bit. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Of course, it wasn't old like this. It was stainless steel. But anyway, they were, so for all those millennials, both of us went, WTF? What are you going to do with that? And we're going to take out your screws out of the, using this old machine here. And anyway, that was quite frightening. I don't know who was holding on to who more tightly, but I had hugged her to try to hold on to her at the time that it was going on. And then they got the screws out, and again, Ernie's right. The bravery. I'll tell you more about that. The bravery is just unbelievable. That someone was, crushed and still able. The other thing I liked about her is her humor. She could find humor in almost everything, even when she was pretty well demolished by this bomb. So later on, so I left the hospital. She got the screws out. We managed to get through that, and then sometime later, I was asked to come to her safe house that was in Sonoma County. So I went there and visited with her, and several times I was also a bodyguard of sorts. So I would go to her house in Redwood Valley, stay through the night, and sometimes when she came out to String Creek, I would stay with her there as well. But I think it's hard to talk about because she would have, which I'm sure a lot of military people go through when they've been bombed, she would have these frightening convulsions at night, and just tossing and turning, and people came and tried to hold on to her and make her feel secure as we could, but it must have just been horrible. I hate to bring this up, but it's you have to really understand what that bomb did and how she was able to, to come through it. So anyway, there was times when she would call me up if she was frightened. She got better. She moved to String Creek. She got better. She would call me up and ask for me to come out and spend time with her if she was feeling frightened about what might go on. she was also getting death threats. She was still getting death threats when she moved out to Stream Creek. And I think there was a situation where she got a note stuck onto the, I don't know if I remember this right, stuck onto the mailbox or something like that. And one of the things we tried to do, my wife wrote a letter to the Willits News inviting Judi to our community and talking about, her rights as a human being. And I don't know if that ever did anything, but that's what we did. And then I just to go back a bit, I had forgotten about it. I wanted to tell you this. I wrote some things down, but I haven't been looking at it. Before the bombing, when we went, when the I think it was the Forest Advisory Committee was bringing their conclusions, and they were trying to get the board to do something. It might have been in '89 or early 1990. I went to the board meeting, and this is the first time I heard LPO, the song. And I don't know if you were in that board meeting. I mean, everybody was just laughing, including the most right wing of the board. Nobody could not smile at that song at that time, and it was just it was one of those things again where Judi could bring people together, mostly just from her humor and her humanity in her, and Darryl as well, singing and playing the fiddle. It was quite something. There's a couple other things that I did, and I just wanted to, first of all, I just wanted to say, and I don't know if it was all from Judi, but all of the Earth Firsters that I had dealt with, whether it's Naomi or Bill Heil and Linda, and they were also always very inviting and very nice, even when we disagreed. I remember one particular one, it was right here at the museum. I had disagreed with something really pretty fervently, and Naomi came up to me afterwards, smiling and looking at me and telling me, it was okay and blah blah blah. It was like it's hard to like hold grudges against people who will do that. But again, with Judi and her humor. But the other thing, I don't know if you all remember that there was the LP memo papers that Judi had gotten. Well, she was afraid to give them to the press, so she gave them to me. But I think it was actually Naomi who gave it to me. So she gave it to me to give to Mike Janella, who is our local Press Democrat reporter. And it was a little bit humorous. So I call up Mike, say, yeah, I've got these, I've got something for you. I couldn't tell him what it was over the phone. They didn't even give them to me. We like met somewhere in the middle of the street. Everybody was, worried about who was following who and all that kind of stuff. This clandestine, operation. So Mike says, well, I'll meet you at a restaurant. So we met at this cafe, and it was overlooking Lake Mendocino, and nobody else in the cafe. And I don't think it's there anymore. We're sitting at this booth. I bring the papers in, put them on there, slide them over to Mike. He picks them up. He opens them up, and he scans them. This big smile on his face, and he looks at me and he said, "Judi Bari gave this to you, didn't she?" And of course, I'm stunned about that he said, and I said, which in the terms nowadays it would be called a non-denial denial, right? I said, I can't tell you who I got these from, Mike. That was all I could say to him. Anyway, from there, if you all remember, then there was the interview with Harry Merlot, and We Log to Infinity, and all that kind of stuff came on. And actually, I think that was sort of like the beginning of the end, really, for Louisiana Pacific, once that sort of hit. And it was obvious that somebody inside Louisiana Pacific gave the papers to Judi, right? And I think she finally admitted it years later that it was her that actually got the papers. But so that was, I felt good that she would trust me to be able to pull that off. She probably doesn't know that it, you know, I look like a deer in the headlights when he asked me if it was Judi Bari. But anyway, then for me, I was broke and needed to find work. So unfortunately, over time, I became less and less involved with Judi and, you know, with the Earth First as I was working to try to get ISF off the ground, actually make a living. You know, I had quit my job at 40 with 3 kids in school and a mortgage, and trying to figure out, you know, getting little bits of money here and there. I wasn't a dope grower, so there was no income for me, so I had to like put a lot of energy into that. So from that point, Judi got stronger. There was she got help from Alicia and others, and so I went about doing my thing. But I think, you know, at that point, after that, I didn't have a lot of communication with Judi until, you know, she died. Which is unfortunate. But just a brilliant human being, and you don't find people like that very often. Really. Thanks.
Okay, so Darryl has been called away to deal with his car situation. So I'm sitting in, I'm Alicia Littletree, and I will be your moderator for the rest of the event, or unless Darryl comes back. So our next speaker is Naomi Wagner, who is an Earth First organizer, a comrade of Judi Bari's, and who worked on all of this Alliance building as an organizer with her, and then continued that work after her death. The Alliance for Sustainable Jobs in the Environment, the Real Wood Co-op, and much more. Naomi Wagner.
Thank you. Well, it's just been wonderful to listen to all the things that my fellow panelists have been saying. I would like to just sit here and absorb it. And there's so much. I actually made some notes before I came because at first I couldn't remember anything, and then all of a sudden I remembered everything, and so it's really hard to choose. But I'm gonna kind of try to anchor my comments in the topic, which was building bridges with timber workers, because that's really what we did. And you've heard examples of it from the different perspectives. It's really amazing to me. I guess looking back and reflecting, I'm understanding so many things that I haven't even thought of before, or just have not thought of for a long time. But because Judi really always married the interests of the workers with the environmental interests, they were always together, always represented as one and the same. Getting to know timber workers, especially the workers, because Judi really, as you've heard, she really differentiated between workers and management and owners. And she educated us on those subjects. She gave little talks. She, told us all the things that were in those books. And because we actually got to know the inside, the timber industry kind of from the inside, from talking to Art, from working with Ernie, from working with Walter, it just really broadened my perspectives greatly and helped me understand more what we're dealing with. It's kind of a far cry from just don't cut any trees, and yet, back in those days, actually, there was always a faction that was like the radical of radicals in Earth First or in the environmental movement that were against cutting any trees. No trees should be cut. We should leave the forest alone. It can heal by itself, and that attitude still is there today. But what we learned from talking with people in the timber industry that are actually making a living, actually wanting the forest to continue so they can keep making a living, is that it's not so simple as just not ever cutting a tree. When I look at all three of you, I think of all the things that I've learned from you. From Walter, I spent a lot of time, quite a bit of time driving places with Walter at different times, and I remember there's a particular grade just outside of Willits, as you're going to Laytonville. I think it says it's 9 miles to Willits from Laytonville. And that's where you explained to me, Walter, how to look at a tree and figure out how many board feet were in it. And that was very instructive to me, you know, that you can, he allowed me to see the trees like a logger, and without having an emotional response to it. And that might sound a little bit shocking for an firster, but it was grounding, it was practical, it was something that we could work with. And I guess I could mention Dr. Rudy Becking, who was a HSU, a Humboldt State University professor of forestry, very radical guy. You remember him? Mm-hmm. We worked together. Rudy was a very stubborn Dutchman. He was in my parents' generation. I actually, since I grew up in Arcata, I knew him as a family friend. Babysat for his kids, and you know, I just knew him in a whole different way. And then when we started really getting into forestry issues, we went to classes that Rudy had, and Rudy talked about sustainable forestry and how trees do grow. And that's something that loggers used to say to us, you know, well, trees grow, they will grow back, right? And this was the 90s, remember? And as devastating as the logging was, some of you saw the pictures in the photos of the clear cuts in Darryl's movie. And you heard what Ernie said, you know, about, whoa, we came back after 4 years and it was just like this horrendous thing going on in the forest. So it helped us to understand what the loggers were actually up against. As in the movie, actually, Judi says, well, I should backtrack a little bit. She used to say, people used to ask her, well, she'd say, you know, you need to talk to loggers. You need to talk to people in the industry and to find out what they're thinking. And you know, a lot of us environmentalists, I actually have talked to a lot of loggers because I grew up with them in Arcata, but a lot of people like, well, how do you talk to loggers? And she would say, well, first you blockade them. and of course not all loggers were receptive to that, but quite a lot of back and forth did happen, and it still does today. When we blockade, we just had this happen out in Soda Gulch. Had a very good conversation with the drivers. And made sure that they knew that we're not against the workers. So that really has been a recurring theme with Judi, and of course she would deliver her message on the bullhorn, right? As you can see in the movie. And that was a very familiar labor tactic that a lot of working people relate to. And even though, as Art said, not too many loggers actually did come over, they came over in a different way. They came over by agreeing not to fight us or not to attack us physically like they did in Humboldt, where we did not have this kind of relationship. So in their tolerance, and in Ernie's bravery in speaking out, and Walter's bravery, and obviously they suffered the consequences of this brutal industry. So, you know, Earth First is an action group, right? Not an organization, but an action group. And so we don't just talk, we actually have to do what we say we're going to do. So in Judi's case, that was like, well, we want to, you know, we talk to these loggers and we find out where they're at, and we understand that we have this common basis, this common interest where basically they're cutting themselves out of a job and they know it. That's why I wore this t-shirt today, the corporate fall t-shirt, because that was really the bridge that we had in common, that we realized we're all workers, we're all getting exploited by the corporations. When Maxim came to Humboldt County, it was like the Gestapo arrived there. And I grew up there, and it was not like that with Pacific Lumber. They were community oriented. They paid for sports in the schools. We didn't think of them, you know, even though they were harvesting old growth trees, they weren't just slaughtering it. And there was a steady source of employment, with stability in the community, and you could always go to them for a donation. And same with Harwood's too, very community-minded and community supportive. So where was I with this? All of this kind of led to, we actually formed a business, well, right along with what Walter was telling you about the Institute for Sustainable Forestry. Earth First was very involved with that. we actually came up with something we called the 10 Commandments of Sustainable Forestry. And the very first commandment was, thou shalt not cut old growth, right? So we felt like we were making progress by having these alliances. We were able to actually talk about how logging should be done. And I've actually turned this over in my mind a lot. It's kind of a conflict for me because, you know, Earth First, we have on our t-shirts, it says no compromise in defense of Mother Earth. But actually, we did compromise when we got together with loggers and we started trying to find a way that we could make it work so that you could have jobs and environment. And that was the whole propaganda strategy of the industry, of the owners, was to drive that wedge and say that you can't have both. It's either one or the other, and the environmentalists are taking away the loggers' jobs and all that disinformation and violence that creates. So that was their plan, but our plan was a lot different. We countered it with alliances, with getting to know people, and working together. And after the Institute for Sustainable Forestry got set up, we kind of had this format. We have these guidelines, similar to the nonviolence guidelines. Okay, we've got A, B, C, and D. We're going to follow these rules, and we'll come out okay. And there'll be trees, there'll be forest, there'll be jobs. We're good. That was really the alliance, that alliance building, that bridge building. That's what got Judi bombed. Was that she was actually countering their propaganda and that divisiveness so effectively. So we ended up, and I can't remember if Judi was still alive when we started the Hillwood Co-op. She was.
She was instrumental in actually getting it evidence, get it organized.
So we set up I think it was a nonprofit, and we actually bid on some jobs. And we landed a contract with the county for the Little River Airport. We're going to do a sustainable plantarum type logging there that really was by the book. It was Dr. Rudy Becking was part of it. Walter, I think
You wrote the harvest plan.
he was the RPM, and Ernie was going to be the LTO, and we were going great. It was, you know, the supervisors loved it and had all these endorsements, and wow, all of a sudden the timber industry swooped in. They tried to sue Rudy Becking for his forestry license. They just came at us in all different ways, and boom, we lost the contract. And that sort of was like tells you, you know, how it works. Art, you know, that's how the game is played.
Yeah.
We learned that too. That when we would just get to a certain point, and then it would all go away. Because the timber industry is so powerful, because they're not local, because they are, like Ernie said, an investment strategy, and trees grow faster on Wall Street than they do in the forest. So we learned that. The Real Club did another job. We actually did a job for a neighbor of mine on Sherwood Road, and she had a property with some big fir on it, and someone had built the house right underneath these fir trees when they were small, and then of course they grew. And it was to the point where the trees were dropping so much stuff on her roof that she couldn't build a fire in the winter, and she had no shade, no light, and so on. So she wanted to take those trees down, and she had a big redwood redwood log that was still millable, and Ernie worked it out so that the numbers added up, and we could actually make some money. I didn't make any money. I didn't get paid. That was not good. We didn't have a union. I did this voluntarily. It became a full-time job, really. So we did that job, and I must say that a self-loader is a thing of beauty. Watching Ernie load those logs, watching the skill with which he felled the trees, and the light that came in, and you know, it's ironic because we protested salvage logging, right? But here we are using a salvage log to pay for the plant, right? But this was small time. This was, local. This was like not, it was making a living, not a killing. And that's the difference. So now we've, come all this way, with 12 went its way. I forget what even happened. It kind of dissolved. But really, we got blackballed by the county, by the timber industry.
They bought us
Every
every
inch.
turn.
Every inch. So we're trying to do good, trying to show how it really can be done right. And of course now, 30 years later, the forest there's even less of it, and we have climate change. So the whole concept of sustainability to me is kind of out the window in a way. The timber industry has co-opted the sustainable standards. The 10 Commandments are no longer in place. Thou shalt not log old growth is no longer happening. And
Just from personal experience, I don't mean to, I just want to add something quick. On the face, MRC tries to portray themselves as a green industry there. They have a green rating, they have a green, All MRC is LP without Harry Merle and better PR, that's all.
thank you. Very well said. Yeah, we got 20 years of respite with Mendocino Redwood Company because they didn't have anything to log. And their sustained deal plan was like, oh, we're gonna wait. And people who had fought the industry were so glad to have the boots off our neck for a little while that we kind of like, okay, you're better than they were. But now those years have passed, and that's who's running the show here, including in Jackson State Forest. Mendocino Redwood Company is managing our state public lands. Let's be clear about that. But anyways, I wanted to go back to some stories and examples about how we built bridges. And one of them was the party that Darryl mentioned, the Earth First Logger Party with Irene Heskin. Irene Heskin was a wonderful Chicana woman who her main contribution to the actions was to feed everybody. And she would drive around in her little Toyota half-bed Stateside with a huge cauldron of beans and rice and tortillas, and she would just come to the line wherever we were. She'd feed you, logger, Earth Firster, didn't matter. And she had a lot of friends in both communities, and so she's like, we got to get together. And she called for an Logger Earth First party. So we all went over to Irene's, and it was like over on the coast of my
It's in Westport?
near what, not quite that
Dehaven.
Freon.
Dehaven Road.
Dehaven,
Yeah,
over by
Valley, I was-
Branscombe Road.
Yeah,
Just
so
there,
we all get there, all the
Get wood at that
Earth
place.
Firsters, all the Earth Firsters in their tie-dye, and the loggers are in their boots, and we brought our potluck, and we looked, and we're like, oh wow, all the hippies we all brought cheesecake, but the hippies brought the cheesecake like loaded with sugar and all the, dairy, because we wanted to please the loggers, but they would like that.
That was one of my main bitch against Earth First was that every time I went to an event, I started looking, I spent the whole night looking for meat. Meat.
So, and Judy had told us, no hippie stew, not eating hippie stew to this. So we brought our luscious cheesecakes all full of dairy and the sugar and stuff. And we see that the loggers, must have been their wives, they brought tofu, they brought cheesecake too. Tofu cheesecake. And so there was all these different things, and of course there was a lot of drinking, and that's when Darryl got pretty loaded. But he amazingly was throwing these. They were playing horseshoes, and he threw these dead ringers, and he would like throw the horseshoe and fall down. Throw the horseshoe and go and create a ringer. So we were all having a lot of fun there, and oh, there's so many stories in my mind. This T-shirt, this was just an idea. We had come up with, we were trying to think of what a follow-up would be for Redwood Summer, and we came up with Corporate Fall. Actually. Ron Johnson, my excellent, you mentioned him, came up with Corporate Fall. And our kids all heard this, they're the first brats. And they're running around in Irene's field, it's getting dark, and they go out to this trailer with a friend of theirs, and they come running back to us, and they're like, Mom, Dad, there's a guy there that's making a picture of Corporate Fall. He's has a cartoon of Corporate Fall. And I think that was Tom Tomorrow.
Well, Tom Yates did the t-shirt.
Tom Yates. Okay, so Tom Yates had heard about the concept, and he set to actually drawing it. The kids went out and saw that was there, put it all together, and voila, we made the t-shirts. Stand up.
Is that one?
Yes, this is the Corporate Fall. And this is what we really have in common, is we need the corporations out of here, so we can do what we need to do and make sense for our communities. So that's just one story about that. The end of that party was that, of course, loggers, when they get really drunk, they have to fight. They're supposed to fight. But they knew that they had to be a fight. But they knew that we were nonviolent wimps, so they couldn't fight us. So they had to fight each other. And that's what we do. So they did that, and then Irene comes out, waving the spatula and breaks it up. It was all good. So we just had a wonderful time at that party, and I think those things just like have traveled on. I'm going to tell one more story about the little Pinto. When Judy got well enough after the bombing to actually go out on an action, she couldn't go into the deep woods, right? But she could get as far as Sherwood Road, which is the road I live on, or off of. And there was a logging show down at the bottom of our subdivision, which borders right on, it used to be LP land, borders on MRC land. And so we got all ready to go. We staged ourselves at, may I say it, down Dave Beebe's house. But of course, being hippies, we didn't get up quite as early as loggers. And that's the one thing that loggers have taught hippies, right? Is to get up early. So, not our natural state. So we were late, and as we were out on the road going to the logging gate, the trucks passed us. And we're like, oh no, we missed them. So then they go down into the logging, to the gate, and we're like, well, we had this Pinto there, and it was quite a big job to get it there. We have to use it. So we blockaded them in. And just as the sun was rising, the log truck comes up the logging road, and it comes to the gate, and it's blocked by this Pinto that says Earth First on it. And so there's a big picture, and Darryl and Jimmy are playing music, and it's a whole big scene. And that's how we got to know Mr. Matthews, who was the licensed contractor on that timber sale. Well, needless to say, Mr. Matthews Cecil was not happy about this, and he wrote letters to the papers and criticized us because he wasn't cutting redwoods, he was cutting tannin. Well, Ernie knows what that means. That's really kind of like a bottom of the barrel when you are cutting tannin, because it's like you couldn't get a better contract. And so we didn't realize that we had actually really embarrassed him. We had shamed him. And we didn't even realize that until he started writing letters to the paper and saying what stupid adversaries we were that we couldn't tell a redwood from a tannin. So Judy, we said, okay, we got to write back. This is the dialogue. This is the kind of talking that we did. So we wrote letters back and said, yes, we can tell the difference. And why were you logging tannin in the first place? Well, this parlay went back and forth until Mr. Matthews invited us to come to his house in Redwood Valley. And we went numerous times, Judy and me and a couple other people, to sit down in their home. His wife made us tea and coffee and cookies. And what are you going to do? Be, hostile in an environment like that? No. So we talked with Mr. Matthews, and we worked it out that we were going to have a forum with timber workers and refirsters. And that was all going great. We were going to, we started to get down to the details, who would be on the forum, on the panel, and we rented a hall. Boom. Mr. Matthews calls us up and says, sorry, it's off. I'm never going to get a job in the industry again if I do this. They just told me.
And that's kind of what I went through.
Yeah. So the very last thing I want to end up with is how this attitude pervaded, this talking to people. In Humboldt County, we got a lot of flack for not listening. We'd go to protests and we'd be yelling our stuff, and we wouldn't be taking in the other side. It was just like back and forth, no real communication. so, and we were criticized, like, you don't listen, you're not listening to us. So our friend Spring, who was maybe 17 years old and very beautiful and lovely young woman, she set up a little table at the mill head in Scotia. And it had written sign in Judy lettering that said, "We will listen." And she would go there at shift change, and people would come up to her, and they'd start talking, and she would listen. Well, that got to the point where management told them to stop. They better not talk to her anymore. So we moved over to headquarters. By that time, Ellen Faulkner and I were working with her and helping her. We weren't there every day, but pretty often, every week we were there a couple times. And then they told us, they kicked us out of the headquarters too. They turn on the sprinklers, you know. And that's the way they do it. So then we went to the post office, which is U.S. property, and they couldn't kick us out. Boy, did we get an earful. We heard from timber workers' wives. We heard from their mothers. We heard from their aunts and uncles. We heard how much they were hurting, how much in debt they were, how little health care they had, how they were disabled and not getting compensated. We learned a ton just by listening about what the people that you might call opposition were going through. Well, the end of that was that Spring got a death threat. And she was sitting in her car one day, I guess she had packed up or something, and one of the timber workers, one of the mill workers, who was fairly friendly to her and supportive of her, came over, he got in the car and he said, "You gotta leave. It's dangerous. You can't do this anymore." So that was the end of that. But, you just keep trying. And I guess I could probably go on more and more, but I just really appreciate all of you so much, and it's just so great to see you. And here we are. I don't know exactly what we've accomplished, but I know that if we hadn't done it, it would be a lot worse. So thank you very much.
Before we open this to Q&A, I want to address a couple of things I heard. After Judy passed away, the United Steelworkers of America went on strike against Maxam Corporation and actually their subsidiary, Kaiser Aluminum. And so there was a union on strike against Maxam in Tacoma, in Spokane, Newark, Ohio, Gramercy, Louisiana. And the short version of this, because it's a very long story, is I went up there I flew up to Spokane and met with the steelworkers, offered Earth First support, started writing press releases in their union hall, sucked down more hot dogs and secondhand cigarette smoke than you can possibly imagine. Maybe you can, but here was, and I spoke at a number of union halls and talked about how the environmentalists wanted to support their strike and that we were fighting Charles Hurwitz the same that they were, except for different reasons. And a couple things happened. After I gave quite a number of speeches, Teamsters had a rally for the steelworkers. I spoke on that one on top of a picnic table with a bullhorn. Really reminded me of Judy a lot with that bullhorn. I felt for that energy. But this is what I told them, and I got this pretty quick, that when they were in a union, they had freedom of speech. They were allowed to talk to an Earth Firster without being afraid of being fired by the corporation. And so one of the first things I said to them whenever I gave my rap, my 5 or 10 minute rap, when I spoke to them, was the most important thing you all have with this union is the ability to speak freely. Everything else falls after that. If you can't speak, as we've discussed here, some of the people can't talk to the Earth Firsters because they're going to be fired or blackballed or whatever, then everything's shut down. So freedom of speech is a reason it's the First Amendment, because it's the most important one. And that's story number one. And then also with steelworkers, I was there for a few days, and Dan Sampson came up to me and he said, "How would you like 200 steelworkers to come down in some buses and picket at Pacific Lumber Company?"
Right, in Fortuna.
In Fortuna and Scotia. And I said to him, "You can send 200 steelworkers down on buses to, I said, "How can you afford that?" And Sampson said to me, "We have $280 million in the bank." they had a strike fund. It's like my world changed at that precise instant. There I was doing benefits for like $50. They had 280 million, and they did come down. And it wasn't. And then they came to the shareholder meeting twice in Houston, Texas, and we built bridges. This is after Judi passed, with the steelworkers and formed the Alliance for Sustainable Jobs and Environment. And so Judi's legacy lasted through there, and also that's where the Teamsters and Tortoises hooked up for the WTO. That was the United Steelworkers of America who built the bridge with the environmentalists for the WTO rally. Came right out of that directly. There's a direct line from there to the WTO rallies. So that was just a little side note, a little kind of a denouement to the story here.
Darryl, there's one little extra part of that.
Please.
Thank you. I can tell about that. When we went to the mill in Futuna to protest there with the steelworkers, the contrast, I can see it in my mind so clearly. The hippies are all, in our usual hippie garb and our long hair and our tie-dyes and stuff, and the steelworkers were wearing long leather coats. And they just looked so different from us, and yet we got along so great. But at the end of that rally, we were there till shift change, and we were hoping that the workers were going to come out. The company locked them in, and we left because the steel workers were like, well, that's going to piss off the workers a lot if they have to stay over and can't get out because of us. That's just kind of dirty tricks that they do.
And along the same lines as don't judge a book by its cover, I was at that big, we had an impromptu drink-a-thon at Eel River Brewing Company. We brought 200 steelworkers and about 100 earth-firsters in without a reservation. You just walked in there, and so there I am, somewhere midway through, at the urinal, and there's John Goodman at the other urinal, and he's got his big white cowboy hat, this giant rodeo belt buckle, and he says to me, and he wound up being one of Julia Butterfly's main support people later on. He says to me, I tell you what, he's from Houston. I tell you what, he said, if anybody gives you a hard time around here, you just talk to me because I'm the toughest guy in this bar. Anybody gives you a hard time, I'll kick their ass. He says, I've done four tours of duty in Vietnam. I got a 7th degree black belt, and I ride rodeo. He says, but don't get me wrong, I've done like lots of LSD, and I like to put on women's clothing. Which was not only true, but he did when we did street theater, and he played Mary Bullwinkle, the PR person for Pacific Lumber, and the steelworker women went out lingerie shopping and high heel shopping for John Goodman. I got the pictures to prove this, by the way. And that just goes to, and then he wound up being Julia Butterfly's negotiator with Baxam later on down the line. And I'm not saying that, everybody's going to be putting on women's clothing and popping LSD. But what I am saying is don't judge a book by its cover. Everybody's got a story. As many people as there are, there's that many stories. So that's just another part of the bridge building that you can see. Sometimes it's not what you expected. So open up for questions, or anybody else wants to make a comment, please do.
He's the best imitation of Bullwinkle.
John did.
John Goodman.
Yeah, did better than, I can't remember her name sometimes.
Mary Bullwinkle was a worthy adversary.
Yeah, but the woman in the Matoll did a really good imitation of her. She's the one who did an imitation of Tracy Kellerman at her wedding. You know who I'm talking about. Anyway, Goodman even topped this woman imitation.
I remember when we were marching on Scotia with the union, and these guys were going union, and somebody says, they don't have a nonviolence code, and I was saying, this is a proper use of testosterone, and we did what we marched on 3 different mills that day.
We did.
Enough with this one. They lost it on to the next one, and quite a lot got done.
When the steelworkers went down to Houston, we faced off with Charles Hurwitz, and there's a whole lot of stories for that. There was actually right outside of Huntsville, the death penalty capital of the world, and I think it was Leo Gerard, who was the regional head of the union, and had 200 steelworkers in the room, and there's Hurwitz at the front with his board of directors, and he says, Charles Hurwitz, I want you to see the men and women who you're affecting, and want everybody here to stand up. Now I want you to understand something. When I went up buying T-shirts, we'd made Earth First and steelworker T-shirts for the union. I went into the union print shop and I said, okay, so we're gonna 200 shirts. How many mediums? How many larges? He says, okay, we're gonna start with we're gonna need about 75 quadruple X's. Then we're gonna need about 100 triple X's. Then we're gonna need some double X's, and then finally some extra larges for the women. And it was like, where am I? I hadn't met any of them yet. So when Leo Gerard said, everybody stand up, like it was like the entire New York skyline stood up towering over Charles Hurwitz, 200 of them bearing down on him at the front of the podium. It was very impressive, and that in some ways, that is the message, that the people, the working people, can stand up to the Charles Hurwitzes of the world if we put our minds to it. Alicia.
I have a question for Art and for Ernie. Art, you talked about the bombing, like the experience of feeling personally like terrified as well and checking in the car. I think we all had that experience too. But can you talk about learning of it? And I mean, you said you trusted Judi, and she was being accused of bombing herself. You knew that wasn't the truth.
I did
right?
not know that. And I came to that conclusion soon thereafter, but I did not know that. And it was like, oh my God. And so, so I wish I could sit here and say like Walter and Ernie and everybody else and say, well, I knew that, but I didn't. And, but anyways, it wasn't like I was blaming her. It was just a huge shock, and we had so much invested in what we were doing, our meetings, the trust, and it was like, if what they're saying is true, this is really, really bad. Mm-hmm. But I will say this, I never told anybody that, okay? This is probably the first group I've ever said that to. Because what I knew is that we had to put a lid on the violence then and now. It's like, okay, I'll never forget, we did a candlelight vigil at some church in Ukiah, and we sat around and chanted. And it was like, whatever we have to do to calm this down, I mean, we can't let this get out of hand. It was really, but then I gotta say that, I got interviewed by the FBI, and they're like, Darryl and Judi did it. And we're just talking to you as a formality, I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's true. That's a true story.
No, but I don't doubt that it is.
One of the things about her lawsuit was trying to kind of quantify the damage that was done by the false charges. It sounds like the betrayal that people may have felt within the coalition she was building was
Well, I don't know
serious
how
damage.
other people felt, and I certainly wasn't about to go out. What I didn't know, okay, and I just didn't know, and I knew what I was hearing in the news, which was what everybody else is hearing in the news. I was like, man, if this is true, this is really not a good deal, and anything was possible, and back then it was like, who knows? But all I knew was that I wasn't gonna point fingers or say anything. What I knew was that we built this trust with, Naomi, the Earth First, the loggers, the timber workers, and that we couldn't let it go because of the bombing. And so we worked real hard at and I think we had another meeting probably soon after that with Steve Zweibach discussing that, going, okay, what are we gonna do? This happened. and it all worked out, and I mean, except for it didn't work out for Judy and Darryl the way it should have. But the work we put in leading up to it, the trust we built meant that we could salvage what relationship we had, and it all. And I'll go on and say I could spend a lot of time talking about this, but somebody talked about, Walter talked about Redwood Summer ended up in these two big rallies in Fort Bragg, the timber workers and the earth bursters, and there was probably a couple thousand people at each rally, and the Earth First camp out leading up to that rally, they camped out for about 3 weeks, I think it was, about 2 miles from our sawmill. And so, we gave them mill tours, and of course, if you were at the rally, if you watched Darryl's film, at their camp out, they couldn't have alcohol and they didn't eat meat. Well, hell, they all came up to the Branscombe store porch and they drank beer and they got deli sandwiches because they couldn't get it. And of course, that's where all the sawmill workers hung out. And so everybody got to know each other. They spent 3 weeks getting to know each other and liking each other. And the night, I'll never forget the night before the rally, we'll see you tomorrow, We're at different rallies, but it was like.
Then there was a big log in front of the road.
And I got a phone call from Pam Davis at like 6 in the morning. Art, somebody fell a log in the road. Like, that's my problem, Pam? You need to do something. Okay, I'll get my chainsaw. Well, by the time I got there, somebody came by. See, a nice logger came by and cut it out of the road so they could get through. But that's kind of the relationship. Yeah, we weren't all in agreement, but we had fun.
So I have to say something. I went to both those rallies, and the only reason I could go to the logger rally was because Walter was willing to take me there, and it was me and who was the other person? There's another woman. I remember you put your arms around us and just shepherded us into that rally, and that's the way we were able to be there because no one was going to mess with us if we were with Walter. The different thing about that was that we had made such a big deal about our nonviolence code that we wouldn't use drugs or alcohol on actions. And so somehow, I don't know if it was Anderson Logging, Maribel said, okay, no drinking at our picnic either. And so there was no alcohol there. And that totally diffused the violence level. In fact, it was kind of sad because the rally was like...
It cut our numbers in half.
Yeah. and Kay has a video of this where...
I have all the video.
Maribel's trying to get them to go yay rally, and you see this one logger, he's like just kind of like, and his wife picks up his elbow and she goes like this.
Something I wanted to talk about earlier and I forgot, but one time my brother and I did a radio show with Judy at KTYX in Philo, and when we left, I don't remember which one of us made the suggestions. Let's go to the Boonville Lodge. Well, this is a Friday night when all the loggers were in the lodge, all the hardcore anti-Earth First factions were in there. And my brother and I didn't care because he kind of opened that place and everything. They wouldn't mess with us too much. So we went in there, and before the night was over, every hardcore redneck logger in that place was wearing, Judy was on the pool table with a box of Earth First t-shirts, handing them out. And everyone in that place had one on. It started out like, my brother and I hadn't been there, it would have been ugly. But they do better than to mess around too much. So, but before it was over, everybody was laughing and joking, and everybody had on their Earth First t-shirts.
You had that song, Earth First, we'll log the other planets later. That was a very popular bar song.
That was my song.
That was in the bars. They were playing at the bars.
Ernie, I wanted to ask you about your poetry. That was the other question.
About my poetry?
Yeah.
What about it?
Well, okay, so I remember that your
Want to
forest.
hear my latest?
Yes. Yes.
Well, this doesn't really pertain to, it pertains to the Boonville Lodge. But I wrote this not too long ago. It was I could tell there was quite a crowd that night as I drove by the Boonville Lodge. I was on my way home from work in an old beat-up half-ton Dodge. I drove on home and parked my truck and took care of a couple of chores. Put away a bag of groceries I picked up from the local store. When I took a shower, put on some clean clothes, and I headed straight back to town. I'd swallowed a lot of dust that day and I needed to wash it down. Well, I walked in the lodge, stepped up to the bar, ordered a shot and beer. I threw down the shot and started looking around to see who all was here. There were always cowboys and loggers, and tonight there were quite a few. There were hillbillies and tourists, a couple of hippies and a dog or two. Well, I stole to the end of the bar and found me an empty stool. I threw a handful of quarters up on the table for a game of 8-ball pool. You could have heard a pin drop when he walked through the door. I turned around to look and it was like nothing I'd seen before. See, all the skin he had showing was a bright crimson red. He had a funny looking pair of little red horns poking up out his head. Well, behind him was a long, slender tail sticking out of the suit that he wore. It had a point on the end like an arrow that was so long it drug on the floor. Well, this had to be the devil. It seemed plain as it could be. And he was standing in the doorway smiling and staring right over at me. Standing right behind him was a little ugly troll carrying a pad and pencil to track the devil's souls. Well, the devil walked up to the table just as I was chalking my cue. He said, "You're the one I've been looking for. I've heard a lot about you." He said, "I've heard you're a sinner and I've come here to take your soul." I said, "If that's your plan, you should have brought more help than that little ugly ass troll." He said, "Well, I'm the devil and I reign over the night." I said, "If you plan on taking my soul, son, you better know how to fight." Well, then I hit him with a left in the temple and knocked him back on the floor. But he bounced up, blowing smoke from his ears, and he let out a mighty roar. Flames shot out of his fingertips, but I ducked and they bounced off the bar. They burnt the wig off of some poor gal and she went screaming out to the car. Well, he was madder than a Mexican fighting bull, and his eyes turned fiery red. I feigned with a big right hook, and then I kicked him in the ball instead. Well, he fell to his knees and he grabbed himself. His suit was bloody and torn. I picked up an empty Budweiser bottle and knocked off both of his horns. And when he saw those little red horns hit the floor, he threw his head back and began to wail. And I got out my old case pocket knife, leaned over and cut off his tail. I said, "Devil, it's time you were leaving. You're not welcome here in this town. I think you're washed up as a devil, but I hear the circus is hiring clowns. Because what you tried to pull here tonight was surely the act of a fool. Everybody knows you don't come to the lodge and interrupt a game of 8-ball pool." The last time I saw the devil was in an ad for barbecued ribs, and his troll was blowing up long balloons making animals for all the kids. Now the rest of this story I haven't actually witnessed, so I can't swear that it's true. Whether or not you believe it's going to have to be up to you. But if you go to the lodge these days, you'll hear the stories that they still tell. They say the night that I whipped the devil, the fire burned out in hell. Still doing it.
Okay, in the back, the way back, and then in the front. You with the hat, yes.
Hi, I wanted to ask about where we stand now, kind of in terms of this. LP and Maxim are gone, but as you've said, we have the Fisher family, we have Limes, and we have Cal Fire doing their dirty work. So where do we stand, right? Is there still a place for sustainable forestry? Is there still a way to move forward, or has too much been clear cut?
There are. If I may speak to this, I've asked myself many times, were Judy's efforts too little or too late? But a lot of changes have come about. Horse practice rules have gotten a lot stricter, and believe it or not, the loggers are actually happy to comply with these stricter rules because now they're doing logging the way they know they should be doing logging, or at least closer to what they should be doing. There are nonprofits like conservation trusts that are doing really sound management practices on their properties. They're doing some logging, thinning, but they're doing it in a real conscientious manner. And I think it's improved greatly. I think it's still got a long ways to go. And MRC, with smile on your face and do just like LP.
I got a little comment to that. You're probably as young as anybody out in that crowd.
And as I look around, I see a lot of gray hair out there, and I'm thinking, yeah, we've all, as a community, been through a lot together. And I got a little bit of juice left, but I'm getting kind of tired. We need more people with less gray hair that are ready to step up and make something happen, because things aren't the way they could be. And I'm not sure what the answers are, but I know I brought up the Redwood Forest Foundation earlier, and I think it's a tremendous model that people should really look at. And I can tell you that if we would have been successful in buying Louisiana Pacific, the 230,000 acres, hell, we'd have had it paid for, money in the bank, and it would be on a trajectory. That's Mendocino Redwood. It'd be on a trajectory that this community would be so proud of, and we missed by that much doing that. And the same with GP, and what happened was that the people that bought it, hell, they just sucked a lot of the life out of a lot of it. They've been kind of doing a corporate welfare trip, and so. But my point is that there's a different model. It's a community model that people in the community get behind. Waters like it, environmentalists like it, everybody. It's just a good deal, and I would encourage people to look at the REFI model, and it doesn't have to be that, but community ownership of our forests. It's like we don't need to work.
These timber companies seem to be run by the people who live here and are
You're here.
not by some outside.
So I've got Lauren, Richard, and
Jeff.
thank you, Jeff. I got
It's all right. We're all getting old. I forget names too.
All right. So Lauren.
Well, this is for you, Art. So hearing stories about other folks in the logging industry, timber industry, getting blackballed for cooperating with Earth First or Judi Bari, how do you think you avoid that? I mean, you were saying you were so close, you were concerned that there was a bomb in your car. So how do you think you avoided, as Walter said, getting canceled, millennial term, from your colleagues?
Well, the short answer would be I was the boss.
Yeah, right.
But that is not the actual true answer. I didn't avoid it. I got nasty letters from LP. Art, you need to be one of the boys. Gee, thank you. GP, they quit doing business with us. But what I will say is this, is that we as a company sat down and we said, here are our values and here's what we stand for. And we wrote down a list of about 10. The 10 Commandments. Well, you were talking about, we had the 10 Commandments, our 10 Commandments. And when something came along, an issue, and we didn't have to sit down and debate it. We looked at our 10 Commandments. We said, is that compatible with who we are? And if it was, that's where we went. And so that's really, so it made decisions easy for me. And the other thing that made it easy that I knew is that if I went down the road of follow LP and GP, I was finished anyways. So it didn't matter. I only had a chance if we went a different direction. And really had the people that are here on our side, along with a lot of others. But so that has to be good. In the long run, it didn't work out anyways, but it was better than going with the flow.
Do you remember what the 10 Commandments are?
No.
It was like no cutting old growth.
Well, they had different ones.
I had different
You
ones.
had different ones.
Some commandments.
And one final question, Art, like the colleagues that you had, maybe not for your company, but in other companies, I'm sure you're still, friendly with folks, but maybe they weren't as sympathetic to the Earth First movement, Judi's movement. Like, how do they reflect on this now?
Well, I think everybody understood, no matter where you were in the hierarchy, that if you talk too much about it, you're gonna end up like Ernie and Walter. Everybody understood that. I don't care who you were. There was a guy that ran Georgia Pacific in Fort Bragg for quite some time, a fellow named Jim Coon. And he was my father's age, and I'll never forget, you know, my father, he came back from me with Jim Coon, he says, well, you know what Jim told me? He says, I know that we're cutting this forest land way too fast, but he said, that is what the people in Atlanta want, was where Georgia Pacific's headquarters were. So that's what they want, and if I don't do it, they're gonna get rid of me, and they're gonna find someone else that will. And that was a fact.
And that was kind of the tape that the loggers company owners had too. Was, you know, they're going to do it, and I'm in debt here. I've got to make my money back. I've got to make my payments. So if I don't do it, somebody else is going to step in and do it anyway.
And you see this in other professions like law enforcement, where you might have a cop who wants to, you know, do the right thing, and they get either lose their jobs or they get, you know, messed up by other cops. So that wall was there for a number of professions, including the timber industry.
Make no mistake, there's not a logger alive that didn't know that what they were doing for LP was not the way that it should be done. But whether they chose to sacrifice their principles, their financial well-being, or peer pressure, or whatever, they just wouldn't stand up to it. But they knew that they were doing it wrong. Everyone.
And I say just one thing real quick. You asked what my 10 commandments were. Google Valdez principles, and you'll see it, because that was the reality is that was a set of principles that closely reflected what we had already decided. We're like, oh, okay, that's us, and Google that, and you'll have a good idea.
You know, I think that a lot of workers, sometimes they get a little bit upset at sort of the condescension that somehow the workers aren't going to be able to figure out what to do. So just give you a couple of examples. As the timber industry went down in Mendocino County, I saw one worker that I had worked with driving a UPS truck. Another one who was just a hard-ass guy, log truck driver. He came up to me the day after I had met with the press, and it was in the papers and blah, blah, blah. He said to me, when the logs are all gone, I'm putting a rock bed on this, and that's how I'm going to make a living. He said, I don't care. And I saw him down the road 5 years later, and he had a rock bed on the back of his truck. So it's like a lot of the guys knew that stuff wasn't going to work. Maybe some of them had to move away, I don't know. Some of them, you know, maybe went on welfare, but a lot of those guys found jobs. I remember the same thing was said about Oregon. Oh, the Oregonians were going through, like, if you shut down the national forest, all these people are going to be out of work. Their unemployment never moved an inch when all that happened. So, you know, there's humans, or, you know, men and women that are in one industry, they found ways of getting another job. Yeah, people went through some hard times and stuff, but, you know, we're not all like idiots that we can't figure out that there's something else that needs to be done. The biggest problem is that where people did find it is that they were ruining the forest, and they understood that. They understood that very clearly. We all understood it, all my workers understood. You know, we just looked around, what are we doing? The forester would come out and go, this is not forestry, and they would agree with us, but as we're saying, they got to pay bills, and, you know, whatever, they wanted to stick with it because they were afraid. Most of it's fear of the future. And to answer that, the young woman in the back, we definitely need younger people, and all these ideas of sustainable forestry is shifting very rapidly because the climate is shifting. And things that Art said about, you know, community-owned forestry. One thing that Judi Bari did say at the LPO meeting is that we should you should have eminent domain on Louisiana Pacific that they weren't treating the forest that was benefit not only the community, it's not just our community. You have to realize that climate change is a global issue. It's not just what we do in Mendocino County. So I want to put that out. Yeah, community forestry, looking at the forest from a much different perspective now. It may be fortunate or unfortunate, but the climate is changing dramatically. We need to do something about it. Forestry is part of the answer.
Yes.
We have a few questions. I want to just make the point, we have Jeff, we have Beth, and we have Richard. And we should probably take a look at the clock after that to see where we're at time-wise. Karen Madsen, our wonderful curator, is nodding her head. Yes, let's look at the clock. And it made a little advertisement say just before we go that we have the Friends of the Museum over there with Brent Walker, who's raised money to help pay for Betty Ball's airfare, for example, and some of the hotel rooms. And so if you want to contribute to the Friends of the Museum, who will help support things in the future, please feel free to do that. And then also I've got my little Earth First swag table over there with Judi Bari books, etc. And that's all donation only, including free. So anything you want over there, take it, put some money in the box, or just take it. So
There's also a sign-up sheet if you want to get involved with Jackson State Forest Defense. It's the sign-up sheet for the nonviolence trainings. But if you put your name on it, you'll get on a list that you'll receive information about it. You're not obligated to go to a training, but you'll be in the loop and you'll know what's going on in Jackson State.
I want to go to Jeff because he hasn't spoken yet.
All right, I'm certainly willing to be number 3 on your list, but it's timely right now for me. And that's that, as Art was talking about the Redwood Forest Foundation's efforts to buy into the depleted, semi-depleted forests in Mendocino County. He was talking about how close they came. Mm-hmm. And even when they did buy the Usal Forest, they had to go to Bank of America to get funding. They still owe Bank of America something like $60 million on this purchase. And Darryl, you were talking about the Union Strike Fund of being, did you say 180 or $280 million? That dwarfs what it took the Redwood Forest Foundation to buy into 60,000 acres of timberland. And they are still strapped with this $60 million debt and with the right of Bank of America to protect that investment. And Bank of America is saying, before you let Jeff Hedin come in there and open up a pathway so you can bring people down to some of the nice parts of your ownership here and examples of what you can do, you need an insurance policy that will guarantee that if he's down there doing something and he trips and stumbles and starts a fire, that you can cover the cost of this $60 million. This has been crippling. And I'm a lapsed anthropologist, sort of, but we had a term for this. We called it cultural momentum. This is the whole thing, this idea that everything that's going on is connected in a system of debt structure. It's classic, and it has been an issue in cultural change around the planet. And I'm wondering if REFI ever was connected to these retirement funds and so forth to say, let us borrow money there on a better deal than we can get from Bank of America. In all this effort to set up community involvement in the forests of Mendocino County, did this ever come up as to a way to break the cultural momentum that leaves these efforts still strapped, still controlled in the monetary control of outfits as big as Bank of America?
That's a question?
And
No, I don't think so.
why,
Richard,
Darryl,
I
with
have
your
one.
connections, didn't that ever come up? It seems that that would have been a logical way to escape corporate control.
Ruffy went to Washington. Art was one of the people that went there to get these, interest-free government loans to acquire community forest land. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, we
Walter
tried
was,
to get it.
Walter was the first executive director, not
Walter was
only of
there.
the
Walter and
Institute
I went to
of
Washington,
Sustainable
DC.
Forestry, but of Ruffy.
And trying to get tax exempt bonds
There you go.
so that you could purchase forest land issuing tax exempt bonds, right?
It was just
Because
one Republican stumbling block, right?
Wow. Like, no.
I don't think the Republicans were a stumbling block because they would be happy to give
It was one legislator.
tax exempt.
That's the whole dream of, I was with the Alliance for Sustainable Jobs and Environment Eureka model. And with the union guys and Tracy Cattleman and Chris Peters from Seventh Generation, et cetera. And until the Ruffy model, yes, but until working people need to own their own land. Just like a community needs to own land in order to do that, because we're in this plantation capitalism model. You know, whether it's cotton or the Central Valley of California, or whether it's MRC or Red Emerson, whatever. It's like, they get all the control of the resources, and they find the people with the skill sets that can make them money. And see, Ruffy's got a chance with the 50,000 acres with a different model. And MRC has been trying to undercut and actually take Ruffy's bid instead of Ruffy getting that 50,000 acres. And it came down to, there's no way that the forest that Ruffy got could pay Bank of America. The depletion is so extreme. And they got competition to cut down by Mendocino Redwoods Company to keep them from getting a conservation easement. It was just, I'm not going into those details, but cap and trade is the only thing that's letting Ruffy get income from sequestering carbon in trees for 100 years at a time that can enable that to happen. It's set up so that to actually make that happen, to make other Ruffies, and Ruffy wants other things to happen like that, community ownership of forest. But there's a tight grip. There's a tight grip on that capital, and that strike fund. That's a good thing, and there you go. There needs to be more of that. Or if Ruffy model can't happen, and Ruffy's model is larger, older, mature trees, good jobs, and a bunch of stuff. Jeff talked about the recreational aspect. There's a Native American aspect. And Art's really been leading on that with the cultural values of that place fit in with fire protection, and to meld that stuff together. It's not. This is not some easy kind of deal, because there's a tight grip. There's a tight grip on forest land that needs to be broken some way with the community base.
We're running out of time. Both Ernie and I have to leave. I've got 2 vehicle issues. 2 cars with 2 different sets of issues. Beth Bosk had something to say. I'm going to close with Beth, and then we can mingle and talk amongst each other or leave as we need to. And so Beth.
Okay, so now I have 2 stories.
Excuse me a minute. Joey.
Ruffy was doing pretty well. They got their land, and
Can't hear you.
Ruffy was doing pretty well. They got their land, and their logging practices were being bragged about all over the place, and I think some income was coming in. And what happened was the Fisher family, the Fisher brothers, the old man had died, who acquired LP land that he's had as generational heritage for his family.
No, we are on Highway 101.
Got jealous. And what they did was they went to Governor Schwarzenegger at the time, and they put this real big roadblock in your way for a whole year.
It was actually Jerry Brown.
Jerry Brown, for a whole year, they almost crushed refugees organization. That's how determined these corporations, and this is a family corporation, get doing anything other than what they're doing that's successful. The other story that pertains to Art was his feelings kind of guilt because he believed, well, maybe they were carrying explosives. How well do I know these people? When I first heard that Judi Bari had been grown up and very quickly learned about her injuries, how the spring had gone up her crotch, I said, who?
About 1 o'clock, I think.
FBI
It broke down.
put out the story.
Yeah, right around then.
I said, who can believe that a woman would put a bomb under her crotch? They had a motion device to it. Who could believe that? Well, 2 days after the bombing, we had this memorial. I guess it's called something else in downtown Fort Bragg in front of the city hall. And we were worried as activists that any one of us could get blown up at the time, that there might be some madman out there. And we were gathering there, and an equal number of loggers were there at the same time, and they were angry. They were really angry because they believed the FBI. They thought that she was transporting explosives. And they were gathered around Jerry Philbrick, who is an LTO from Comschi, and he's probably the most hippie-hating LTO there is. And his guys are grumbling and talking about getting Anne Marie Stenberg, who had brought this together, Anne Marie, who lived in Fort Bragg. And there was a Fort Bragg police cop between Anne Marie and this group of grumbling loggers just waiting for all help to come. And Jerry turns to them and he said, settle down, guys. I know Judi Bari, and she would not be dumb enough to carry a bomb. He was one of the guys who met Art and Judi and others at John's place 2 days before and bonded over the years.
Well, I just have to add that I have to thank you, Art, and you just mentioned Jerry Philbrick. We actually went to their logging yards. That's where we had our meetings, in their logging offices. And those offices are really comfortable, and they always have a desk that the boss, whoever, puts his feet up on, and you always ordered pizza. And so it's just like these gestures that, even though we were like, totally at odds with each other and conflict, but they would still do that. And Jerry, ordered us pizza, and then he says to us, he showed us all his equipment and everything, and he goes, touch my truck or dead meat. But have some pizza. And Art, one time, you might not remember this, we would go to the supervisors with signs, and in those days we always had signs on sticks for some reason. We didn't know to just carry them. We always had them on sticks. And the supervisors said we couldn't come in with our signs because the sticks could be weapons. And so Art provided us with these very slim little sticks. They were just like, they were milled out of redwood, and they were very, they weren't standard size. They were very small. And we were able to tell the supervisors, well, Art gave us these sticks. It must be okay. And they let us in.
We were at the valley up in Westport. We had the logger environmentalist coalition get together. Judi was trying to, at one point, she got up, of course all the loggers were drinking beer. Judi got up on this picnic table to speak. And every time she'd start to open her mouth, a couple of loggers in the back would, oh gosh, shut up! And I listened to that for a couple of minutes, and finally I got up on the picnic table with Judi, and I said, you guys, just to let you know, I'm Ernie Pardini. I'm not a member of Earth First, and I have not taken a vow of nonviolence. We'll be back to see you if you open your mouth.
It's cultural.
We are going to close this event, but I have to ask everybody who spoke here before, anybody who asked a question, Richard and Jeff and Lauren and Alicia and anybody else who asked, and Beth, do we have your permission to be on the video for the movie. Did anybody who spoke here today, and the young woman back there in the hat, is that okay that you're on the museum website with this event?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, there you go. We got a blanket, a blanket release. I want to thank everybody again for coming. We can mingle around. We're going to actually go into the museum a little bit, take a look. I got a car, I got a tow. And, oh, and Karen Matson, this is our last, over there is our curator, Karen Matson. I had the absolute pleasure of working with Karen and curating a museum thing. That was a, 65, the first time I did that. Well done. And so please, come up to the table and talk to people. And Ernie, Art, Naomi, and Walter, thank you so much. And special thanks to Trinity.